Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with David Biespiel. David is a poet, critic, memoirist, novelist, and painter. His work has earned many honors, including a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Lannan Fellowship, and a Pacific Northwest Booksellers Award. He currently leads graduate poetry workshops at Oregon State University. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
David, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Well, thank you both. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a writer. I'm a poet primarily. I live in Portland, Oregon. There's a 5,000-acre forest inside of Portland, and I live on the edge of it. I'm from Texas. I grew up in Houston, and I've written about that, and I'm looking forward to talking to y'all.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Which one is your favorite, poetry or prose or...
It's really a scary question for me. Primarily, poetry is my compulsion. I don't know if it's my favorite. It's the most difficult and most interesting for me to write. And it's what I've spent my adult life concentrating on. The other writing in prose, I guess I would say, just kept happening accidentally. Sometimes it was work for hire, like writing book reviews. Sometimes I got myself involved in being a columnist, writing about poetry, first for the Oregonian and then for the Rumpus. A lot of work for hire for reviews. Out of that came a memoir, and out of that came a novel.
And what was the focus of the memoir?
I've written a couple of them. One of them is called The Education of the Young Poet. The seed of that was my editor at the Rumpus asked me if I would write about how I became a writer. And so I did about a year's worth of columns tracing the roots, R-O-O-T-S, and the roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, of how I became a writer, kind of starting in college, I guess. That book was called The Education of a Young Poet. It really starts with my great-grandfather immigrating to the United States from Ukraine. I sort of seed my early cognizance as a writer in his mouth, his language, his languages. And then I wrote one called A Place of Exodus, which was about where I grew up in Houston, Texas, a neighborhood, a section of the city called Meyerland, which is a densely Jewish section of the city. I went to school, I'm at the synagogue, not at public school. And I had a falling out with the rabbi there and was kind of kicked out of the building. And so I wrote about that story and really about why I miss Texas and why I haven't gone back.
Are you comfortable talking more about the falling out with the rabbi?
Well, there's a lot of components to it. My family are kind of synagogue people, and there's an expectation that you would also become a synagogue adult when you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was certainly on track for that. I went to kindergarten at the synagogue. I went to elementary school and so forth at the synagogue. I was bar mitzvahed, of course. But I wasn't like other friends in the neighborhood who went to public school and, then kind of took Hebrew school once or twice a week. By the time I was a teenager, I was in this kind of special group of students, not because we were special, but that we had been going to the school our whole lives. And we're very fluent in Hebrew. Studying Torah and Mishnah and so on. And at the same time, I was becoming deeply unenamored of questions about faith and God and curious about other ways of thinking about the world as opposed to those which were in this very tight-knit and secure community that I was raised in. When you study like that, in Judaism, you're encouraged to ask questions. But there are some questions that you really weren't allowed to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of crossed that line. And the rabbi who'd been my rabbi since I was a tyke, since I was 3 or 4 years old, I would not say I was a protege at all, but we were close enough. And I looked up to him just to kind of had it with my persistent questions and invited me to leave in public in front of all my peers. He kicked me out and I didn't resist.
I relate, actually. I asked questions that I was not supposed to ask many times. Whenever I found a group where I thought I belonged, I felt very comfortable and asked questions that were not encouraged, and I was kicked out countless times. A lot of times things went south.
Or north, depending on how you look at it. Yeah, I think that it was complicated. On the one hand, the day of the quarrel, I certainly put him on his back foot and he reacted. I mean, I've been in enough classrooms now over the decades to know what it's like to have a bad day. For a student to kind of get under your skin or to catch you out or, you just aren't in the mood. And so to a degree, when I wrote that memoir, A Place of Exodus, I was older than the rabbi was then. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And when I wrote about my family and my parents, and my father suffered a major stroke in his 40s. He continued to live, but he lost his speech, more or less. He was aphasia at 40 years. So there were a lot of things going on in my life then. And I think I caught him on a bad day, but I also don't think he was interested in helping me. But I also wasn't giving him a chance to. I was a good student. I was
Mhm.
curious. I was engaged. I think I was probably headed in the direction of the rabbinate. I jumped from wanting to become a rabbi to wanting to become a poet. It's really no great leap. Still immersed in the book and
Mhm.
still immersed in language. And it took me a while to acknowledge that.
Speaking of which, can you talk about why you gravitate toward poetry more than other art forms? Why do you consider that your primary mode of creative expression?
Well, when I was really young at that school and later on, they passed out our English textbooks. I always just kind of went to the back and read all the poems. I think it's fair to say that my familiarity with prayer made reading poems not that difficult for me. So I think I was kind of an easy mark for the pleasures of poetry. The value of metaphor, the multiple meanings of words, the ambiguity, and the intensity of a speaker, just to name three kind of cornerstones. So I think when I began reading poetry in English, John Donne, John Dryden, Alexander Pope, heading up into the Romantics, John Keats, probably above all, William Wordsworth, and the early American poets, Phyllis Wheatley, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, and so on, they just seemed like friends to me. I don't know how to put it. They just seemed like people I understood what it was they were trying to get at pretty easily. I enjoyed reading them. And then late in college, I began discovering contemporary poetry, poems written in our idiom, poems written by people obviously much closer to my age than dead poets. And I just got the bug. I just thought, this is what I want to do. And I kind of reoriented my life around it.
Can you take us through the trajectory of your career? Like, how have your poems evolved over time? What kind of evolutions do you see across your collections?
Each book of mine has, to a large degree, been interested in a kind of formal compositional problem. Not my first book, Shattering Air, came out in 1996. That's just a book of apprentice poems. I was just trying to figure out how to write poems, and I was fortunate enough for someone to publish it. The second book I wrote is called Wild Civility, and I was writing what I was calling American sonnets, kind of before the American sonnet really took off. And I was trying to write traditional sonnets, Italian sonnets in English, and they weren't going very well. And so rather than take the blame myself, I blamed the form and I kind of blew it open. I just thought, well, instead of 14 lines, I'll write 9. And instead of, roughly 10 syllables a line, I'd make 20. And I just kind of constructed my own form out of the sonnet and called that an American sonnet. And so those poems are kind of really wild. I was interested in a vast range and register of language, and a lot of those poems are dramatic monologues. The next book was sort of back in my normal voice, where the mask between poet and narrator is really thin. The next one that book was called The Book of Men and Women, title tells all. And the next book, Charming Gardeners, all the poems are in the form of letters. They're epistolary poems. And then the book that followed there was a single poem of 50 some parts, and each part had 3 segments. And, so these formal concerns interested me as a way of orienting and solidifying and focusing my imagination. I needed to play tennis with the lines drawn really clearly. Strangely, the syntax, the grammar, their temperament feel very much like the earliest poems I was writing. For people who are interested in writing poems, a poem is a place in which you do a certain kind of thinking. And there's various ways of doing this thinking, but it's a different kind of thinking than you would do, say, in a novel. And it's not just the length. It's that you're trying to think through shapes, meaning lines and stanzas, and you're trying to think through metaphor. I think in form when I'm working on a poem. I think in lines. I think in movements. I think in spirals. When I'm making a poem, I'm trying to hear, but I don't only mean hear, and I don't only mean feel, the kind of all at onceness, multiple kinds of simultaneities going on. And I find that really interesting. And I think that's probably what has kept me focused on writing poems all these years, because it's endlessly unsolvable. It's an endless mystery how those things come together in words. So to the degree that I think at all in poems, I think in form. And I figure the content will take care of itself.
You've been doing this for decades. Can you share your secrets with us? What has made you keep going?
I keep trying to quit. It's a compulsion, I think. I don't know what I'm after, really, when I'm working on a poem. I never really have. I mean, I get, like I said before, a kind of formal interest, and then I want to explore it, kind of think in poems. I mean, sometimes an essay is what I need to do, but really, when it comes down to it, if I had no choice, I would ditch all the other prose and just work on poems.
And you've got another book coming out soon. Can you tell us about that project? What is that book? What are the formal questions you're exploring in it?
Yeah, thanks. I have a book coming out in September. It's called Beautiful is the World, and it's a new and selected poems. It spans from 1996 to 2026, 30 years. It's a retrospective of my poems. So it takes poems from each of the books I've written and then new poems. It's been interesting to do this book because, on the one hand, it certainly fuels one's self-hatred, because you think, well, that's it, I guess. That's all I did. I thought I'd be further along. Turns out I still am just struggling as ever. And relating that to your previous question, when things go well for me to the degree that they do as a writer of poems, it's when I feel like I know the least. When I've kind of slaked off all the noise, all the decades of learning, what I've done in the past, habits, to the degree that I can, when I'm sort of lost and don't know what I should do, I feel like I did at the very beginning. And I find that to be a really suitable place in my psyche to write. So when I was saying earlier that the new poems feel like the first poems, it's something about that yearning to allow a little mystery to remain in the process. Those first poems of mine had a kind of interest in desire and wonder and longing. And I feel that's really prominent in these new poems as well. I did learn this working on the selected poems. I came to really confront or acknowledge to myself that the tension in my poems has always been between beauty and terror, both external and internal. And I wanted the selected poems to land on beauty. The title comes from the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, who's a really important poet to me. And the epigraph that gives you the title in English, the translation by Hannah Block and Stephen Mitchell, is, "Beautiful is the world that wakes up early for evil. Beautiful is the world that falls asleep to sin and mercy." That expression, beautiful is the world, I thought really captured the complexity of it. I wrote another book called Every Writer Has a Thousand Faces, pinched the title from Joseph Campbell, and it came out of a lecture I gave. And in that book, I guess I tried to make the case for the importance and kind of elemental role of failure for a writer, any kind of artist. And I became really comfortable with failure growing up because I have my own examples of failing as I describe them. I say that the rabbi had a bad day. I also had a bad day. And if I hadn't had that bad day, my life would have been different. There's no doubt about it. But I also, growing up, this is a bit of an aside, but I was a diver like you see in the Olympics. And that's how I went to college. And you can't do a sport like diving, or gymnastics or something, and not have a high degree of comfort with failure. You just can't. And you just practice every day, every month of the year. And most of the time, when you finish the practice, your coach is saying, I want you to fix this. It's just an expectation that you cannot do it perfectly. And even if you did do it perfectly, you'd have to do another one. And that would not be perfect. It's like the baseball players, the best players hit the ball 3 out of 10 times. What they're really good at, those baseball players, is not hitting the ball 7 out of 10 times. they don't hit the ball. And so I tried to transfer that into the quality and practice of making an art, which is most of the time you don't get it. You don't get what you're after. And yet that is the art you make. The failures are the thing which distinguishes you from someone else. That combination plus all the other factors makes the thing that's you.
I love that. I always say, I don't call mine failures, I call them challenges. And I always love when I wake up in the morning and think about how many challenges I'm facing and what can I do to overcome them. It's more exciting than, I will do A and B and it's fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way I sometimes think of it is I'm not trying to overcome the challenges or the failures. I'm trying to explore them.
Mhm.
And what can I discover out of that might end up being, in my case, the poem?
Well, I mean, I guess overcome is the language a lot of people are used to. They understand it as like, for example, you have a question that you're exploring, you write a poem. People think you overcame that question. But for me, it's
Yeah.
trying to find solutions. And one solution is like a door that opens to a big house with many doors. And then
Yeah.
I have to choose another door that takes me to another door.
Yeah. And every time you open up one door and walk through it, it prevents you from going through a different door.
Yes. And then you
Because
have
you
to
make a
find
choice.
another door.
That's right.
Yeah. So we always ask our guests to read. Do you have anything you would like to share with us, whether a poem or an excerpt from your other works?
I thought I would read the first poem of this book that's coming out in the fall. It's called Waking Early. And it begins with that feeling of recognizing that you're waking up out of a dream, where you can sense both the subconscious world and the emerging conscious world kind of at the same time, which is a state of being I find really interesting. When I was a little boy, I used to always try to stay awake for as long as I could because I was really curious about what it felt like to fall asleep. And I wanted to be awake when I fell asleep so that I could, you know what I mean? Okay. The poem is called Waking Early and it runs about 30 lines. Out of a dream, out of breath, as if halfway up a hill, the almost sunlight in the trees interlaced in the air, the old pitch black hour resting all the while thousands and thousands of feet up, higher than any mountain or cold cloud, adrift, intimate, vulnerable, star this, star that, settled into rest. It's an awkward feeling to hear the cars slide like layers of earth, gray-green forest earth, layered like years far in the past in which we might not recognize ourselves as ourselves, but as wood smoke rising among thousands of branches of trees, the topped-off leaves ricocheting like choiring birds, or loosened as frail light, or like daylilies, however flawed, gathering at the side of the road, bright-faced, spring-pointed, pastoral, still in sunlight or sadness, like a wing's blur that at any distance becomes a passing forget the moment's moment, like a harvest at dusk, sky the color of doves, white-crowned, common-collared, hitting the horizon at the high dust distance in the heart. It stuns me as much to imagine as to see them, hear them. Then one tree followed by another is falling, and every wobbling ring where the rain had poured, the circles inside the gravity of what we are after, is newly alive inside time, and true as the flaws we wake with. A moment lost, finally, or passed off as nothing to believe.
Your inner Texan comes out when you read.
Yeah, they couldn't shake that out of me. My border state parents tried, but they really couldn't.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Great. We really enjoyed having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.